All right, everybody. Hello. I hope your extended break has been treating you well. But we have to get back in gear for our AP US History exam. So it was originally going to be in the first week of May. It's probably going to be uh, a little bit later than that, but we don't know for sure. The AP College Board is still figuring it out. Um, but we will continue learning and continue working on our topics until we, you know what's going on, and we're going to be super prepared for the AP exam. So, you guys have been doing a little work. We started the, industrialization of America in class. So you guys should have been working on the rise of big business, the impact business is having on everyday people, um, and we should have a good idea of that. Okay, so what are some problems that are going on the um, with industry? How is it affecting people? Let's see. So we have things like social problems. So these social problems are child labor, right? We talked about how, you read how children were perfect for factory work because they were so small. They were small in stature. They could fit into places much easier than a full grown adult. They had tiny hands and fingers that could get into machines if they need to fix things, if they need to access another part of the machinery. So we're going to exploit the child right now. Okay, back then, childhood pretty much ended at 8 years old because by the time you're 8, you're going to be going into the workforce. Okay. So we start to realize this is a problem. We should not be letting 8 year olds work in a factory. Okay. Imagine being 8 and working in a factory with machines. Your parents aren't there. They like to abuse the children. It was just a horrible, horrible way for children to live. So we have child labor. We also have the exploitation of just everyday labor. So we're going to, pay people 10 cents an hour to work in really, really horrible conditions, really, really horrible working conditions, right? So that's an issue, okay? So what we really are trying to do is we're trying to progress past those issues, okay? So at this time, the government has no role in regulating the industry. Doesn't regulate how people do their business, doesn't regulate how to protect their workers, anything like that. So the progressive age comes about. So what the progressives are, it's a movement that basically are going to be fixing the problems that came from industry, okay? So I want you to write in some notes. So pause right now and go get a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil, whatever. Pause this and you're going to go get that stuff. Because I want you to write on the top the progressive age. That's what we're talking about. Okay. And this is basically what is going on. We are trying to fix the problems that came from industry. Okay. And you can write down the problems are child labor, exploitation of adult labor, and um, working conditions. Okay, very dangerous to work. All right, so that is the progressive age. We're progressing past these issues. All right, so I want you to, I'm going to read this definition, and I want you to put this definition in your own words in your notes. Okay, so the progressive movement was a movement or groups of different reform movements that took place at the turn of the 20th century until World War I, and it was directly caused by industrialization and urbanization. We know what industrialization is, right? We talked about that. And one of your readings is about urbanization. So, urbanization is what? People moving to the city. Okay. And why are we moving to the city? For jobs, right? For factory jobs. So, these guys are trying to reform or make better. Problems that are going to happen because of urbanization and industrialization. This movement sought to improve life in the industrial age by making moderate political changes and social improvements through governmental action. All right, they wanted to limit the power of corporations, improve the democracy so it benefited the people, and strengthen justice. All right, so justice, when we think of justice, what does that mean? It means everyone being treated the same, right? So we want to make sure that our workers are working in somewhere where they don't have to fear for their lives, right? We want to use the government to do this. So that's why today we have things like the Food and Drug Administration, right? So they're the ones that make sure that all the things we put in our bodies are okay to put in our body, right? Because we're not just going to take a medicine off the street from some guy if it's not credited through the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, okay? So this is when we're going to start using the government to regulate products, number one, and the process in which we get the products. So what's going on in the factories, okay? So you can pause this, and I want you to write down a definition of this in your own words, okay? All right, let's keep going. All right, so the origin of the progressive movement started in what was called the populist movement. So the populists were basically a bunch of farmers who were fed up with getting the short end of the stick. Okay, they were basically, they wanted their crop prices to be better. They wanted better mortgage rates from the banks. They wanted the railroads to stop being so high because that was going to affect their product, right? Because they have to sell their products. They were worried about the industrialists, so those robber barons, those railroad barons like Andrew Carnegie, Cornelius Vanderbilt, those guys. We are worried about the greed that's coming along with them. So what happens is these farmers are gonna get on board with the urban workers. Okay? So the farmers have these issues, right? And they're upset that the industrialists have all this power and all this money, okay? And they're going to band together with the urban workers who are experiencing a lot of things that stems from the industrialists as well, right? So the urban workers, they have their problems with the working conditions and things like that, and the farmers are going to have their problems with their crop prices being too low. They're not making any money because the interest rates are so high for their mortgages, things like that. So they're going to join forces, and they're going to basically morph into the progressives. All right, it starts as a farmer based movement. Okay, oh, that's a bad arrow, but there you go. And it's gonna go evolve into one that's gonna basically, hopefully, change what's going on with the farmers and change what's going on with the urban workers. Okay, so now we're called the progressives. Okay, the progressive movement. So, like we said, took over many of the populist issues. It was mainly made up of the middle class, college educated people, and it was centered instead of in the rural based area like the farmers, this one is going to blow up in the cities. Okay. So, big issues here, kind of the same thing. Issues for workers in the cities. We're still worried about these railroad barons who are making a lot of money, and these are kind of the same guys as the industrialists, right? It's all about this greed, it's unchecked power. So some people are saying we need the government to start checking this stuff, okay? These guys, the greedy guys, need to be put in check by the government. Okay, and labor reform, like we said, labor reform. So that's going to be one of these protections for industry workers. So labor means work, right? So that would be the child labor, working conditions, and all that. Okay, so make sure you know this. What I want you to do in your notes right now, put a little chart, put the populist movement. All right, Definitely write about it's an issue for farmers, greed, and crop prices. Those are the big ones, okay? And then put a little chart here for the progressive movement. Just, you don't really have to put that on there, but definitely say it morphed from the populist movement to the progressives. And it was a city based movement and kind of, this one's a big one, right? Make sure greed, labor reform, and more government involvement, okay? Those are the big ones. So make sure you have all these. If you need to, pause the video and make sure you have all this stuff, okay? All right, so let's move on. All right, so the progressive movement was a reform movement. So, what is reform? Reform is to make changes to something in order to improve it. So, that's what we're doing, right? And it's kind of like progress, right? We're going to improve something, we're going to have progress over something. Okay, I'm trying with this little guy. Progress. All right. So it's a social and political movement that wanted one, a more democratic government. So democracy is what? It is the power of the people. So at this time, there was not a lot of people representation in the government. So they're going to say, we want more everyday people's voices to be heard. Okay. The second thing we want is to regulate corporations. Okay. Big business, like those guys we were talking about. 3, look for a solution for social problems. Social problems, like we talked about, where a lot of them stem back to the labor issues with the working conditions and all that. And then 4, to add new issues. Oops, sorry guys. To add new issues along with pushing former populist issues. So we're talking about we're going to help the farmers and we're going to help the urban workers. Okay, so I do want you to write the heading right here. The progressive movement was a reform movement. Write down what is reform and write these 4 things down that we wanted. Okay, and while you're doing that, you can pause it. This is a social problem. Okay, Mr. President, how long must women wait for liberty? So that's going to be one thing we talk about, women's rights. This is obviously a little girl in a factory, so that's another social problem. What is that? Child labor. Okay, and I actually don't know what this one is. I don't know. Might be the temperance movement. Okay, we'll talk about that. All right, so let's move on. Okay, so this is the wish list of the progressives. What do they want? What do they want to accomplish? Okay, first thing, you need to write all these down. Yes, I know it's a lot, but this is important. This is pretty much everything that the progressives are going to work towards. So, women's suffrage. No, we don't want women to suffer. Suffrage means voting rights, okay? So, the first thing we want is women's right to vote. Women could not vote until the progressives came along, okay? Black men could vote, black women could not. White men could vote, white women could not, okay? They also wanted prohibition. So, what does it mean to prohibit something? It means to stop something. Okay, so prohibition is they're stopping the sale of alcohol. And that started from this movement. Oh, Lord. Thought this was going to be easier to write on. Okay, and it was called the temperance movement. All right, write that down next to prohibition. So the temperance movement was basically a bunch of women get together and they start a campaign to get rid of alcohol. They said that alcohol is destroying the family. They said that with alcohol, our husbands are going to the bar after they get off work. They're getting sloppy drunk and they're coming home and they are abusing me. They're hitting me. They're hitting our kids. They're hitting our dogs. Okay. So the temperance movement really thought alcohol was this like evil thing and it was destroying the family. So they had a crazy amount of publicity. Okay. They did basically an advertising campaign to get this banning of alcohol passed, and they actually do. Okay, they get to prohibit alcohol. We'll talk about that later. But this started with what is called the temperance movement. Write this down. Write that down. Temperance movement. All right. Of course, we have end child labor and other labor reforms. Like we said, we want to be more involved in government and the democracy. So they wanted to make sure that we had direct elections for who was going to represent us in the Senate. So before this, the Senate members or senators were appointed. All right, that means whoever was in charge of the state is going to um, pick who gets to represent us. That's the progressives want to stop that. Okay, so we want to directly elect or vote for our U.S. senator, which we can do today. All right, we want another couple little political forms right here, which one is called, we want to be able to initiate new laws. All right, we want to be able to take those new laws and get a petition so we can get, I think now you have to get 2,000 signatures for a law that you want to be passed to go to referendum, which means your law will be looked at by the government, and they will vote on whether or not the law will become a law or not. Okay, and they want to also be able to recall elections. We've heard of that before, a recall. So that means we can remove elected officials if they're not doing a good job. All right, and the last thing, antitrust or anti-monopoly reform. So what is a monopoly? No, not the board game. A monopoly is what? It's when you basically have control over an entire industry. So when we were talking about John Rockefeller, right, he was the guy that owned Standard Oil. You should have read about that. He owned Standard Oil, and he eventually bought up all the other little oil companies. So he owned all of the oil companies in America. He was the richest man in America at one point. Okay. And yes, Rockefeller is um, when you think of Rockefeller, you think of money, right? So Rockefeller Place in New York City, they have the Rockefeller tree, Christmas tree. That's the big old tree that everyone wants to go see in New York City. Okay, his influence is still felt in New York because he had so much power. All right, Jay-Z, his whole record label is Rockefeller, right? And that's because Rockefeller stands for success and wealth. Okay, Jay-Z's from New York. Of course, they hear a lot about Rockefeller. Okay, so the progressives want to get rid of people like John D. Rockefeller. They don't think that someone should have that much power and make that much money. Okay, so they're saying we want to break up these monopolies. There should not be one company that has control over everything. Okay. They also want only the government to be able to provide utilities. So what's a utility? What's the utility that you pay every month? That's a utility. So it's the lights, electricity, water, things like that. All right, that's a utility. And they want to see some restrictions on the powers of the railroads, okay? Because railroads are still making all this money, and these guys still have a lot of power. So those guys like Carnegie and Vanderbilt, Leland Stafford, those are all railroad barons. So they want to kind of rein in their power and influence as well. Okay. So this is our wish list. This is what we wanted. If we were a progressive, this is what we want, and this is what we're going to work for. Okay. So this is going to come up again and later in the lecture. Okay, this is our wish list. All right, so make sure you have all of these. Yes, you need to write them all. Okay, so this is going to be our wish list. So go ahead and pause if you have not written everything, write it down, and then we'll continue. Okay, all right. All right, so another thing that's going to come up in the progressive era is these things called muckrakers. So, a muckraker is basically an investigative journalist, and back then they wanted to expose the corruption, the political abuse, anything that's bad that's going on in society. The muckrakers are going to write about it. All right. And where did they come up with muckraker? Well, this guy named Teddy Roosevelt. Let's see. Guess not. Okay. Sorry, guys. All right. So his name was Teddy Roosevelt. Who was he? I hope you guys know this guy. He was our president at one point. He's a really good president. He's the guy that's going to establish all of our national parks. Okay. So he's the one that called these guys muckrakers. He said they were the ones getting the rakes out and they were going through the muck, the gross stuff of society. So that's why we call them muckrakers. Okay. So basically, these guys are going to expose different muck of society. All right. So write this down. Okay. Write down what a muckraker is. All right. And you can write that Teddy Roosevelt gave him the nickname. Okay. All right. So what they did, write this down. They condemned child labor, corruption in business, dangers of patent medicines and packaged food, and they also called out abuse of power in politics and government. All right, so make sure to write all this down. So the big ones that we talk about are going to be The Jungle. That is a book written by Upton Sinclair. Jacob Riis, he's a big one. He published something called the How the Other Half Lives. He was also a photographer. So his big thing was he would go and take pictures of all the horrible conditions that people were living in the city. So this is a picture of a couple of kids in an alleyway. You know, could be homeless, could just be have nowhere to go if their parents are working. Okay. And then another big one is by Ida Tarbell, and this is called The History of the Standard Oil Company. So this was Rockefeller's company. So obviously she's trying to expose the evils of whatever's going on in the Standard Oil. And then The Jungle was actually, I forgot to mention this, The Jungle was about is about the meat packing industry. Okay. You don't have to write that down. We're going to go a little bit further in the next slide, but make sure you have these written down. Okay. All this needs to be written down. Under muckrakers. All right. So pause if you need to, and then move on. Okay. So muckrakers in 2000, well now it's 2020, would be called investigative journalists. We have those today, right? So write down this lady. Her name was Ida Tarbell, and her big thing was she was fighting monopolies, and she wanted to get rid of corporations and trusts. So, and she wrote the history of the Standard Oil Company. Okay, so she's exposing what's going on with monopolies and how they aren't good for society. And then this is a big one. It's one of my favorite books, The Jungle by Upton Sinclair, and it's about the meatpacking industry. So what would happen is in meat factories, and he talks about this. This is actually it's a fiction, okay? It's a work of fiction, but it was written to kind of sensationalize the issues that are going on in the factories. He wrote this book so people would want to read it, but they could also see how horrific, yes, that's the word I used, it is to work in the meatpacking industry. I mean, back then, people would literally cut their arm off from the meatpacking industry in a machine. It would fall in with the other meat. You think they're going to throw that meat away? Heck no. They're going to use that meat. Okay? So they would grind up this guy's like arm. Okay? and just sell the meat. Mice, rats, cockroaches, all that stuff, drop it in the meat, but they don't care. They're going to grind it up and they're going to sell it. In the book, a whole guy falls in the meat grinder. Okay? He dies completely and they still sell it, right? Because there's no governmental regulation. So Upton Sinclair wrote this book to kind of expose all that nastiness. And it's not just a an issue of workers' conditions, right? It's also safety. Like, should someone be forced to eat a diseased rat when they don't even know it? No. Okay. So this is why the progressive era is so important, and it has lasting effects up until today. All right. So in your notes for the next slide, we will be looking at a political cartoon. So I want you to write down your thoughts about this cartoon. We will have a Zoom meeting next week. I will tell you the date of when that and time when that's going to be, and we will go over the analysis together. Okay, that is going to be your little assignment, um, just for right now. Just do it right now. Okay, so this is the political cartoon. All right, so it says a nauseating job, but it must be done. And what does this say? Meat scandal. What does this look like? Investigation. What is this? What is this? This, so you know, okay, this is the White House. This is good old Teddy Roosevelt, okay? That will kind of help you. So I want you to write down, take a few minutes, look at this pretty little cartoon, right? This is Teddy Roosevelt, who's the president, and this is the White House. All right? And I want you to write down 3 things you notice. What are 3 things that are symbols of something else that we've talked about? 3 things present in this little cartoon that you notice. All right? Go ahead and pause this. Look it over. Take a few minutes. Write down 3 things that you notice. And what are we talking about? What is the symbol? What's the symbolism, right? What is this symbolizing? What's this guy that he's holding symbolizing? What is this symbolizing? What is this symbolizing? Okay? And then you're going to get on the Zoom and tell us about it. We're going to discuss. All right. So now we're going to talk about the progressive era presidents. So the progressive era is going to span, a couple decades. So we have a couple of presidents we're going to talk about. And what did they do? Did they grant the progressives any of their wish list? Okay. The first guy we're going to talk about is Teddy Roosevelt. So Theodore Roosevelt. We're going to figure out, do you think he was progressive? So he had this Sherman Antitrust Act. So remember, what did Ida Tarbell want? No trust, right? So would we say that this is progressive? Yeah. Don't worry about that. Okay, U.S. Department of Commerce and Labor. What do you think that's going to address? Labor issues? Yeah, that was on our wish list, right? So I want to say labor. Okay, we're going to look at our wish list. All right. So what about this? These 2. Government restrictions on railroads, right? Was that on our... Yeah. Look, there it is. There's our wish list. So, yeah. Seems like he's being a little, progressive here. The Meat Inspection Act. So this came out as a result of the jungle. Do you think this is on the progressive wish list? Where would it be? Labor reform, right? Yeah. What about the Pure Food and Drug Act? Yeah, it's going to be the labor reform, right? National Conservation Commission. He did a lot for the outdoors. He loved the outdoors. Okay, he's the one that started the national parks right here, like we said. All right, so a lot of it is going to be about the wildlife. So, do you think he was progressive? Let's see. Yeah, he was. Okay, because he's going to be trying to, um, you know, give some of these wishes on our wish list. Right? Good. Okay. All right, so for this one, his name was William Taft. He actually, he's best known for, he once got stuck in a bathtub in the White House because he was so big. But that has nothing to do with progressive, so let's look at this stuff. Okay, so he helped pass the 16th Amendment, which is going to establish a federal income tax. All right, he's also going to pass the 17th Amendment, which is going to be, like we said before, the direct election of senators. So that's a good thing. He starts the Department of Labor, which is going to require federal employees to only work 8 hours a day. And he's going to pass the Mann-Elkins bill, which is going to regulate the railroads more effectively. And he's going to make sure that employers are liable for work done on government jobs. So he's trying to make sure that the employers are going to take responsibility for anything that happens to their employees on government jobs. Okay. Today we call that like workers' comp, right? Workers' compensation. If you were to fall, if you work at Kroger and you were to fall when you're on a ladder, who's going to pay for your medical bills? Kroger. Okay. And that's liability, right? But this is just starting right now on government jobs. Eventually, this will expand to all jobs. But right now, Taft kind of just does it on government jobs. So let's look at the wish list, right? So didn't do anything about suffrage, nothing about prohibition, nothing about child labor, but we are going to see labor reforms, right? 8-hour days. And we're going to see political reform, direct elections, right? He does that. And he's regulating the railroads. So yeah, would you say he was a progressive? Yes. Oh, that's what this guy's for. Sorry. Yeah. All right, next guy. Oh, I don't really talk about. Well, I think we talk about Wilson in a second. Sorry. All right. So yes, we have two progressive presidents so far, and then Woodrow Wilson is going to be our third progressive president. He is also a progressive. So Theodore Roosevelt, he's a Republican. He becomes president in 1901 because William McKinley is assassinated, and he's reelected in 1904. Then we have William Taft. He was elected in 1908 after Theodore Roosevelt, and he is going to be defeated in an election by Woodrow Wilson, who is a Democrat. All right, he's reelected in 1912, and he's reelected in 1916. This is going to be usually in times of war. People don't want to elect a new president, so this is during World War One. So we're gonna see him get reelected in 1916. All right. Oh, yeah, we're just gonna go through that. Now we're gonna go through that. All right. So here we go. All right. Woodrow Wilson, was he progressive? Let's see. So he has the Federal Reserve. So that's about what? Anybody know what the Federal Reserve is? That's about money. Okay. They regulate our money. Okay, then we have the Federal Trade Commission. So this is going to kind of regulate the stock market. Stock and trade. And then we're going to have the Antitrust Act, right? We talked about that before, right? We don't want trusts. So is that progressive? Yeah. All right, the 18th Amendment. That was women's suffrage. Was that part of our progressive wish list? Yeah, right? Okay, so women can vote. There it is. And then Farm Loan Act, lowered interest rates for farmers. Oh, this is supposed to be on another line. Okay, that's going to be going back to the populists, right? They wanted the lower interest rates on mortgages. There we go. Then we have Keating's Owens Act, which is a ban on child labor. There we go. Workers' compensation, workers' comp. Remember, if you get hurt at Kroger, Kroger has to pay your bills. That's the McGillicuddy Act. Then Adamson Act, the improved conditions and wages for railroad workers. Okay, so he was extremely progressive, right? So he's going to check off this. He's going to check off ending child labor. He's going to check off labor reform with workman's comp. We're reforming the railroad for the railroad workers, right? Political reform. Let's see, we have the Antitrust Act. There we go. And then, yeah, so he checks off a pretty good amount on this list. So Woodrow Wilson would be progressive. All right. So here is how we're going to really see all the different things that the progressives accomplish. Okay. So basic progressive belief, people. Okay. Improve society, rely on science and knowledge. So what we do, we are going to have a direct primary. That's what we're in today. What Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden are trying to, both win the nominee to be the nominee for the Democrats in the 2020 election. We have primaries for that. Okay, so direct means we vote for it. So I got to cast my vote on who I believe should be the Democratic nominee, right? That's direct. Okay. We got direct election of the senators, like we said before. We have women can now vote. We now have more say in local politics. We can, petition for different laws and things like that. And then we're also going to establish city commissions and city manager systems. So we have more localized government. Okay. Business reforms, big thing. So industrialization and urbanization cause problems. So in business wise, we're going to have an interstate commerce commission, which means that is between states how we're going to deal with business like that. We don't have trust anymore, antitrust, no monopolies. We have consumer protection, like the Meat Inspection Act, the Pure Drug Food and Drug Act, right? We have federal trade laws and the Federal Reserve. They're all going to make sure that we are going to have a fair chance of getting our slice of the pie. So that's money. And then government should fix problems. We got that because that's federal. And then to fix problems, government also should be reformed. So we have reforms socially. We pass child labor laws. We have workers' comp. We can't pretty much take advantage of workers anymore, right? And we have zoning laws. Okay, so we have these building codes that come out of the progressive era because of this. Oh, sorry, I forgot. Don't worry about that. All right. So I want you to write this down. Okay. So this is a big event that happens in New York City. There's this company that literally they would make shirts. Okay. And they were in this big building right here in New York City. They employed mainly immigrant workers, so Jewish or Italian factory workers. And there was a fire on, I think it was, this floor, okay, right here. So what happened, they found that the stairs were locked because they didn't want people to leave. Over 60 people jumped to their death. 140 people died in the fire, okay, because they didn't have the safety precautions that they needed to have in place. So this is why we have fire drills. We have to have fire drills during school, okay? Because we have to all know how to safely exit the building. And this is one big reason that we have these laws, okay? Those guys, the managers literally locked the exit so people couldn't leave. So they had to work harder, okay? And because of that, 140 people died. All right. So this is a big, big event. Okay. This helped really, it helped everyday people see how inhumane the working conditions were. Um, we have laws passed on working conditions, and that would be labor reform. And then it's also when we have fire safety codes, like I said before. Okay. So fire safety codes, we have the fire drills. They have to, have like they have maximum occupancies for different rooms based on how big it is, so people don't stampede each other when we're all trying to leave. If there's a fire, something like that. Okay, so this is a big event. So write this down. All right, just write a little summary of it. Okay, but really write this. What is the significance? Why is it important that this happened? Okay. All right. There's a picture of it right here. Sorry, my little guys are everywhere, but yeah, that's where it started. There's a triangle building today. And as you can see, these are some bodies of people that jumped out of the building. Okay, just on the sidewalk. It's crazy. There's other people before it happened. All right. So it was pretty devastating. All right, so that's the end of the slideshow. Make sure you have your notes. I will want to see them when we have our Zoom meeting. All right, continue going with the with your work. Okay, don't let up, because I'm confident you guys will be able to pass this test. And remember, passing the test equals free college credit. Okay, all right. Check your discussion boards for your schedules for each week. I'm telling you exactly what you need to do. And don't quit. All right. I miss you guys. Bye.